Imagine a young shepherd, alone in the fields facing a fierce bear to save his sheep, just a stone in his sling against deadly claws and fangs. What transforms an ordinary boy into a hero? How can someone so small defeat giants and become a leader who would change the history of his people? This is the story of David, a country boy who became king, a man who experienced extraordinary triumphs and devastating failures. But there's a secret in his journey, something that explains how he overcame seemingly impossible challenges. And that secret, revealed at the end of this story, can still transform our lives today. About 3,000 years ago, in a land of green hills and dry valleys, lived a people struggling to establish themselves in their promised land. Think of a young nation, like a teenager trying to find its place in the world. These people, the Israelites, faced constant threats from powerful neighbors. Imagine living in a world without phones, cars, or electricity, where news traveled at the speed of human feet, and survival depended on harvests and flocks. In a small town called Bethlehem, there lived an ordinary family. The father, Jesse, had 8 sons. 7 of them were tall, strong, and impressive, but the youngest, David, was just a boy charged with looking after the family's sheep. While his brothers participated in important conversations and received attention, David spent his days in the fields, alone with the flock. But those solitary days weren't wasted. David learned to protect his sheep from predators. He developed courage by confronting bears and lions that threatened his flock. Under the starry sky, he composed songs on the instrument he always carried, a small harp. His songs spoke about the wonders of nature and expressed gratitude for life. In those times, the people were guided by a man named Samuel, known as a prophet, someone who brought important messages as a special messenger from God. Samuel had anointed Saul as the first king of the Israelites, but things weren't going well. King Saul began making selfish decisions, ignoring wise counsel and the traditions of his people. A message came to Samuel, instructing him to find a new king among Jesse's sons in Bethlehem. When Samuel arrived, Jesse presented his 7 oldest sons. One by one, Samuel examined them. They were impressive men, tall, strong, with the appearance of leaders. But none of them was the chosen one. "Do you have any other sons?" asked Samuel. "Only the youngest, who is tending the sheep," replied Jesse, almost apologetically. When David arrived from the fields, no one expected much. He was young, with a sun-reddened face and hands calloused from working with the sheep. But Samuel saw something others couldn't see, a sincere and courageous heart. Right there before his surprised family, Samuel poured oil on David's head, a gesture symbolizing that he would be the future king. Keep watching to discover how this young shepherd would face challenges that seemed impossible, and how his journey would take him from the sheep fields to the throne of a nation. Meanwhile, the kingdom faced a terrible threat. A powerful army, the Philistines, had camped nearby. They had iron weapons, technology the Israelites didn't possess. But the Philistines' most frightening advantage was Goliath, a gigantic warrior standing over 9 feet tall. Imagine someone so tall he would need to duck to pass through most doorways. Every day, Goliath came out in front of the Philistine army and mocked the Israelites. His voice thundered across the valley, "Choose a man to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants. But if I win, you will serve us." His helmet gleamed in the sun, his spear as heavy as a wooden beam. Every word from Goliath spread fear among the Israelites. Even King Saul, the tallest man among his people, hid in his tent. David's 3 oldest brothers were in the army. One day, Jesse asked David to take food to his brothers and bring back news of the battle. When David arrived at the camp, he heard Goliath's thundering voice challenging his people. He saw the fear in the soldiers' eyes. He felt the shame of a paralyzed nation. "Who is this man who defies the armies of the living God?" David asked, indignant. "Why does no one face him?" His brothers rebuked him. "What are you doing here? Go back to your sheep. This is men's business." But David wasn't intimidated. He was brought before King Saul and offered to face Goliath. The king looked at the young shepherd in disbelief. "You? Fight against Goliath? You're just a boy, and he's been a warrior since his youth," Saul said. David responded simply, When a lion or bear attacked my sheep, I faced them and rescued the animal. This man will be like one of those wild animals." Reluctantly, Saul offered his own armor to David. The young man tried to wear it, but it was too heavy. He couldn't even walk properly. "I can't use this," he said, returning the armor. "I've never tested it before." Instead, David took his shepherd's staff, his sling, and chose 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. Armed only with these simple tools and his courage, he walked toward the valley, in the direction of the giant who terrorized his people. When Goliath saw the young man approaching, he was furious. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and beasts." David's heart beat strongly, but his voice didn't tremble. "You come against me with sword, spear, and shield, but I come in the name of the God of Israel, whom you have defied." With these words, David ran toward Goliath. As he approached, he swung his sling in the air and launched a stone. The projectile flew true, hitting Goliath exactly in the forehead. The giant staggered for a moment, his eyes lost focus, and then he fell, causing a thud that echoed throughout the valley. Victory over Goliath transformed David from a simple shepherd into a national hero. People sang in the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." These words filled the king's heart with jealousy. How could they give more credit to a young shepherd than to the king himself? David's life changed completely. He was brought to the palace, became a commander in the army, and a close friend of Jonathan, the king's son. His musical skills also found purpose in the palace. When King Saul was tormented by dark thoughts, only David's music could calm him. But Saul's jealousy turned to hatred. One day, while David was playing the harp to calm the king, Saul hurled a spear, trying to pin him to the wall. David narrowly escaped. From that day on, it was clear he was no longer safe in the palace. Saul began a relentless pursuit. David became a fugitive, hiding in caves, forests, and foreign lands. Desperate men, those in debt and the discontented, began joining him. Soon David was leading a group of about 400 men. They lived on the margins of society, always one step ahead of Saul's soldiers. During these years of flight, David had opportunities to kill Saul and end his persecution. One night, Saul entered a cave alone, not knowing that David and his men were hidden in the deep shadows. It would have been so easy, a silent strike, and David could have claimed the throne Samuel had promised years before. "This is your chance," his men whispered. "He has been delivered into your hands." David silently approached Saul and cut off a piece of his robe, but his heart immediately grew heavy. "I cannot do this," he told his men, preventing them from attacking. "He is still the Lord's anointed king." When Saul left the cave, David followed at a safe distance. "My lord the king," he called out. Saul turned, surprised. David knelt and showed the piece of cloth. "See, today I had the chance to take your life, but I didn't. Why do you pursue me? What wrong have I done?" Saul was silent for a moment, then tears began to stream down his face. "You are more righteous than I," he admitted. "When a man finds his enemy, does he let him go in peace? I know you will be king one day, and the kingdom will prosper in your hands." But the peace was brief. Soon Saul returned to his obsession, pursuing David through the hills and deserts. For years David lived as a nomad, with no place to call home, trusting only in his closest men and his unwavering faith. The persecution only ended when Saul and his sons, including Jonathan, David's beloved friend, were killed in battle against the Philistines. When the news reached David, he tore his clothes in mourning and composed a song of lament for Saul and Jonathan, calling the latter more precious to me than the love of women. After Saul's death, David could finally return from exile. First, he was proclaimed king over his own tribe, Judah, in the south. The path wasn't simple. For 7 years, the kingdom remained divided, with Saul's surviving son ruling in the north. But eventually, all the tribes recognized David as their king. One of his first actions as unified ruler was to conquer a strategic city in the mountains, which would become known as Jerusalem. David transformed it into his capital, a symbol of unity for a previously fragmented people. To there he brought the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred chest containing the tablets with the 10 Commandments, representing the divine presence among the people. On the day the Ark was brought to Jerusalem, David danced through the streets with all his might, wearing only a linen ephod. His wife Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from the window and despised David in her heart for behaving in a way so unworthy of a king. But David responded, "I will dance before the Lord who chose me above your father and all his family, and I will become even more undignified than this." Under David's leadership, the kingdom prospered as never before. He expanded its borders, defeated ancient enemies, and established alliances with neighboring kingdoms. He organized the government, created a standing army, and planned the construction of a magnificent temple to replace the old tabernacle, a tent that had served as the center of worship since the wilderness days. But at the height of his power, David committed a terrible mistake. One spring afternoon, when kings typically led their armies in battle, David remained in Jerusalem. Walking on his palace roof, he saw a woman of extraordinary beauty bathing. Her name was Bathsheba, wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. Instead of looking away, David sent for her. They spent the night together, and weeks later, she sent a message, "I am pregnant." David tried to cover up his mistake. He called Uriah home from battle, hoping he would spend the night with his wife, and thus think the child was his. But Uriah, out of loyalty to his comrades, still in combat, refused to enjoy the comfort of home while they slept in the field. Desperate, David sent Uriah back to war with a letter for the commander. "Put Uriah in the front line, where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die." The plan worked. Uriah died in battle, and David took Bathsheba as his wife. David might have thought no one would ever know, but a message came through the prophet Nathan, who told David a story about a rich man who stole and killed a poor man's only lamb. When David expressed outrage against this man, Nathan pointed his finger and said, "You are that man." In that moment, the great King David saw clearly what he had done. The crown did not place him above the laws that governed his people. For the first time in years, David felt the crushing weight of his own failure. The consequences of David's mistake were severe. The son born to Bathsheba fell ill and died a few days after birth, despite David's desperate prayers. It was the beginning of a series of tragedies that would strike his family in the years to come. One of his sons, Amnon, attacked his own half-sister Tamar. 2 years later, another son, Absalom, took revenge by killing Amnon. Absalom fled but eventually returned. With sweet words and promises, he stole the hearts of the people, and finally, led a rebellion against his own father. David, now aging, was forced to flee Jerusalem. The same man who once fled from Saul, now fled from his own son. As he left the city, people threw stones and hurled insults at him. One of his advisors wanted to silence the insults, but David stopped him. "Let him curse. Perhaps the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I am receiving today." The rebellion ended when Absalom, riding through the forest, had his long hair entangled in the branches of an oak tree. Hanging helpless, he was killed by Joab, the commander of David's army. When the news reached David, he did not celebrate the victory. Instead, he wept bitterly. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you." In the final years of his reign, David saw peace and prosperity return to the land. Though marked by failures and tragedies, his legacy remained the standard by which all future kings would be measured. When it became clear his days were ending, David named his son Solomon as successor, passing him the plans for the temple that he himself had not been authorized to build. David, the shepherd boy who became king, died in Jerusalem at age 70. After reigning for 4 decades, he was buried in the city he had conquered and transformed into the capital of a unified nation. David's story shows us that greatness doesn't mean perfection. It reminds us that even heroes face fears, make mistakes, and suffer the consequences of their choices. But it also shows that a sincere heart can find forgiveness and begin again. Just as David faced Goliath when everyone else trembled with fear, we too face giants in our lives, challenges that seem too big to overcome alone. Just as David rose after his most painful falls, we too can find strength to move forward when we fail. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to learn more ancient stories that have much to teach us even today. Stories of real people who, despite their flaws, left marks that crossed through time. David's secret, the one we promised to reveal at the beginning, wasn't his physical strength or skill with the sling. It wasn't his courage in the face of danger or his leadership ability. The secret was in his heart, the capacity to recognize his own limitations and trust in something greater than himself. When he faced Goliath, David didn't rely on armor or sophisticated weapons, but on his experience and faith. When pursued by Saul, he didn't give in to hatred or revenge. When confronted with his terrible mistake involving Bathsheba, he didn't hide behind justifications, but accepted responsibility. That's why, thousands of years later, we still tell his story, not because he was perfect, far from it, but because he was authentic in his struggles, honest in his failures, and persistent in his path, even when he stumbled. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson we can take from David's life. It's not our perfection that makes us extraordinary, but our ability to rise after each fall, learn from our mistakes, and move forward with an open heart. True courage isn't in never falling, but in always getting back up. In our next story, we'll meet another fascinating character from the ancient stories, someone whose wisdom became legendary, and whose surprising decisions still make us think to this day.